Hi everyone, I'm Les,
And I'm Ashley.
and you're listening to Anthropotamus, where we explore some of your favorite anthropology topics.
Hey everyone, welcome to our latest episode of Anthropotamus. We're here today with Anika Elema. She'll be discussing her article, Poseidon, Athena and Demeter, Epithets and Associations in the Divine. She is a maritime archaeologist and scuba instructor. Thank you, Anika, so much for being with us here today.
Thank you for inviting me.
And before we get into your article, please just tell our listeners a little bit about your background and what led you into your research into Greek gods.
Well, mythology has always fascinated me and has been my favorite subject whenever it was offered. The idea that so many cultures use ideological myths to explain the unexplainable is beautiful and emphasizes the curiosity of ancient minds. Greece has such a rich history of myth and its interconnection with art history and architecture. My focus was naturally drawn to this field. In my first university, I studied art history and philosophy, then transitioned to maritime archaeology in my master's program. During this time, I wrote my dissertation on mermaids, manifestation, and the age of exploration, which is now available on Amazon. And it focuses largely on mythology and the influence of environmental factors on the development of maritime myth. I've always loved the ocean and its power, and as a diving instructor, I have found a whole new level of respect and connection with the sea. Poseidon stands out to me for this reason.
So, I mean, I don't really have any background in Greek mythology, let's just be honest. Really, so my whole background is growing up watching Xena Warrior Princess. And so I have very little knowledge on this topic. Um, so when you explain epithets in the article, would you say that it is like an epithet of like Athena is kind of like their own little entities? Or would you say it's just like another perspective of the god, kind of like, or characteristic of God, kind of like if I hang out with one group of friends, I'm going to act like this, but if I hang out with a different group of friends, I might act differently based on the people and environment I'm in.
So epithets reference, they act as a descriptor. Epithet use is not limited to Greece or divinities and can also be seen with people, such as with Alexander the Great. Epithets would not provide context when isolated. It's in its relation to specific divinities that provides insight into how exactly they were worshipped and perceived throughout antiquity. I examine the relationship between divinities and explore how changes in the needs of mortals are reflected in the evolving attributes through which the divine was worshipped. Through this analysis, a clearer understanding emerges of how the people of ancient Greece perceived their gods and goddesses. By comparing literary accounts with archaeological evidence and artistic representations, a more realistic picture of life within ancient Greek cult practices and festivals can be developed. This approach not only reveals how mortals understood their divinities, but also highlights how worship functioned as a powerful social connector. Communal rituals and gatherings brought people together in remarkable ways. By moving beyond surface level interpretations and engaging more deeply with ancient texts, we gain the ability to uncover the richer meanings embedded within them. Ancient Greek epithets reflect how people understood and interacted with their gods based on changing needs and environments. Worship was not fixed. Instead, the roles of God shifted depending on context, and epithets helped specify which aspect of a deity was being invoked. Gods like Poseidon, Athena, and Demeter all had multiple identities, and worshippers used epithets to address the specific power they needed. These epithets were shaped by local practices, economic needs, and seasonal cycles.
So, can you clarify your methodology when researching for this article a little bit? It looks like most of what you have included was historical research. What, if any, component was field-based?
So I wasn't able to personally conduct any field research. It was a desk-based approach. And then the different cult sites I researched, I went through the archaeological evidence found.
So, a good portion of this article is basically discussing rituals and community gatherings, which brought people together. Would you say that these gatherings may have been similar in the way we see gatherings today within the Abrahamic faith, or would you say this took a lot more dedication and connections? within each other?
It's definitely difficult to compare, but what is known is that entire communities were shaped by their gods and how they worshiped them. Daily lives were dependent upon good favor from the gods, so the idea of pleasing them was forefront in their minds. Livelihoods from sailing needed the protection of Poseidon and Athena, not just for success, but for pure survival. While charity in the modern sense was largely unknown in Greco Roman culture, the poor did benefit from the social structure of festivals. For the workers, festivals provided an opportunity to eat meat. This was rare and allowed by the large scale nature of animal sacrifices. This empathy and inclusion can be paralleled to almsgiving emphasized in religious gatherings today.
So when you say that the poor were able to eat meat, this might be totally out of your research interest, but when you say the poor were able to eat meat, would you say, or do you think that doing dietary analysis or isotopic analysis helps to would help to define class or status within the archaeological record? Was that common?
Yes, the working class rarely had meat, and it was primarily based off of festivals, not just for its expense, but for accessibility, for sure.
And when you mentioned that entire cities basically participated in these rituals, everybody had a role, rituals, created this kind of sense of authority. For those who maybe didn't participate for some reason, could they be used as maybe like a scapegoat if maybe something really bad happened within the communities?
So it's a great question. Religion wasn't just personal belief; it was a public duty. So festivals, sacrifices, and prayers were all seen as essential. This was done to honor the gods, protect the city from divine anger, and just a way to show loyalty in the community. Those who did not participate could be viewed as impious or disrespectful towards the gods. They could be destructive socially. Others might fear that they could bring bad luck or punishment, or they were marginalized, especially if they openly rejected traditional practices. All of these would harm one's reputation. Religious nonconformity could become a political issue, and the state had an interest in maintaining traditional worship. Even if you didn't have full belief in the modern sense, you were still expected to show up to festivals, participate in sacrifices, and respect sacred customs. The exceptions here were medics or foreigners. They might not participate fully, but they were not always judged as harshly. Philosophers sometimes question religion, though this could be risky. Quiet non participation may go unnoticed, while public rejection drew quite the criticism.
During your research, did you find any specific examples of that?
The main one that stands out, just out of his prominence, is just Socrates. It was
Mm.
not his whole problem, but a huge part of it was people claimed that he was disrespecting the gods, and this is a parallel you could draw there.
Some of the roles in these festivals are very hierarchical and very social. Can you explain a little bit how women use their roles in these festivals to engage in agency in their communities, to
So you
exercise?
can see that in some of the festivals. Poseidon was an extremely versatile god. He was worshipped throughout the seasons by sailors, farmers, and common people alike. The majority of Poseidon's worshippers were men, from the sailors at Sunion to the separation of men from the women at the Hiloa festival. However, women were still present, and in the case of association with Demeter, there is a stronger feminine presence. Though women were confined and seldom left the house, religion did not exclude them. Priestesses were in many cults, and Athenian women regularly participated in festivals. Comparing literary descriptions with archaeological evidence and artistic representation allows a more realistic picture of life in ancient Greek cult worship and festivals to emerge. It must be understood that sacrifice had variety within the realm of economic calculation.
So the sacrifices that were made for Demeter were piglets and pigs, correct? Do we have any idea of why pigs in particular were chosen for this, or would another young animal have been acceptable for that type of sacrifice?
That I don't have too much research on. I do know they were predominantly warm-blooded animals, for a practical side of the sacrifice as well. If you're feeding large amounts of people, the idea of doing something small like fish is a lot more labor intensive than one large sacrifice or multiple large sacrifices.
While we're on the subject of fish, the article mentions that in, I think it was one specific site, fish were seen as a taboo sort of sacrifice, that they were not used at all, while other sites frequently used fish. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do
So, like I was saying, the warm blooded aspect was much more popular, but Poseidon is seen often as an excluded part of that. For Poseidon alone, his worship at Kilauea, he was worshipped as Poseidon Soter, meaning savior of sailors, and Poseidon Taurus, meaning bull of the sea. So, in some instances, bulls would be sacrificed to Poseidon Taurus, and that was the connection there. But archaeological evidence, such as large feasts, diverse fish remains, and bull sacrifice, showed that worship was communal and labor intensive, and offerings made directly reflected his domain. For example, the sea or storms, and even unusual sacrifices, such as fish. These emphasize collective devotion. The fish sacrifice here is especially uncommon as it was not seen at other sites, especially not to this degree. This was largely due to the fact that sacrifices were also intended to feed large quantities. So, like I was saying, the warm blooded, larger animals are much more practical. The remains of a large feast in 165 BC for approximately 200 people have been analyzed, and through this analysis, Colorea is set apart. Of the fish bones found, 18 different species of fish have been identified, the majority of which thrives in various habitats. These fish were not caught all at once from one source, but rather were caught through a variety of fishing techniques, ranging from net to line to harpoon. This feast was the product of various fishermen from different locations around the island using the techniques at their disposal. This part is especially interesting to me. Some fish species were migratory and had to be caught earlier and preserved through salting prior to the sacrifice. So, this variety demonstrates the communal effort behind a sacrifice to the sea god and a noteworthy tribute to his power, as well as extensive planning prior to the sacrifice.
do we have any idea of how that was prepared or presented after or during the festival? How that would have been?
Not that I have found, no. Good
Actually,
follow up though. I'll need to be doing some more research after this as well.
yeah, well, there we go.
I'm curious to know how much of these, ancient Greek festivals and practices have continued on to present day or been, or if aspects of them have been incorporated into current religious beliefs or practices.
In a way, yes, there is a sort of modern revival. The ancient Greek religion we know is often referred to as Hellenism or Hellenic polytheism, and there are small but active communities that keep tradition alive. These groups are mainly in Greece, but are found in other parts of Europe and North America. They're also called Hellenic Reconstructionists, as they attempt to revive the religion based on historical sources. These people celebrate ancient festivals with modern adaptations, prayer and libation, such as wine, honey, or water. They honor household gods and ancestors alike and follow ancient values like xenia, hospitality, and arete, excellence. These practices are based on historical texts, archaeology, and largely philosophy.
Do you see that in general within the Greek culture, practices or festivals that are common maybe in Greece that are connected to past culture that aren't celebrated in other areas or other countries maybe? Wait, did that make sense? That didn't come out as well as I had hoped. But those maybe those who aren't making an effort to bring back these traditions? Are there any subtle Greek practices that are rooted? I would think that are rooted back to ancient Greece.
Aspects that continue, I think, are overlapping with this revival. The aspects of respecting household guests and the ancestors, there's a common aspect of um, this connectedness that we see in ancient festivals and religious practices. And I think a lot of that, even if it's not something that we're fully aware of, I think a lot of people still continue, even if it's subtle, little influences from ancient Greek religion. The idea of having household gods and having, for example, Hestia, the goddess of the hearth, you can see her as a goddess of fire, but she's not destructive. She's not chaos like Ares might be. She's this safe space, this protective and cozy, um, very comforting presence. And I think that idea of the hearth is emphasized in a lot of homes, even if people aren't necessarily aware of its origin.
That's actually a really interesting aspect. I hadn't thought about that one in this context, but I've had a few thoughts about the way things like fire or things like storms might be represented in multiple different contexts within a pantheon. And the idea that one god or goddess would be the cozy aspect, as you put it, of fire versus the destructive, wild, raging aspect is very interesting. And I wonder if there's, and maybe you know this, the answer to this question, but I wonder if there's another aspect that might be represented for something like swidden farming, for example. I don't know that the Greek practiced any kind of slash and burn, but it'd be interesting to see what that would look like.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not too versed in that. Most of the focus for mine is seeing, especially with Poseidon, the difference in freshwater and saltwater. So seeing how his role shifted dramatically when paired with Demeter. So, for example, in winter during the non-sailing season, he became a freshwater and fertility god. So there you would see more festival, more sacrifice surrounding that aspect, and there his epithets included Poseidon Phytamios, which is related to vegetation, and Poseidon Pater, so life-giving father. So this part's especially interesting. So when you see gods and goddesses worshipped together, their epithets demonstrate how their role shifts so dramatically. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
I think it does actually, and it kind of le leads into the next, actually, it kind of answers the next question I was going to ask, which was how environmental factors might influence what epithets are presented um, during worship, other things like that. Yeah, no, I think you answered both questions at once, but yeah, that was a
Can
great answer.
expand if
Thank
you
you.
like.
Absolutely.
So for Poseidon and Athena, we talked a little bit about some of the sacrificial sites where we see the fish bones. Um, at Cape Sunion, Poseidon and Athena were worshipped together due to their overlapping roles. So Poseidon, we know, is protector of sailors in the sea. Athena is controller of winds, but what's less commonly known is she was also in charge of technology. So this was relevant through their ships and navigational tools. So if you were conducting a type of sacrifice for a long distance exploration, you would want to make sure that you're sacrificing to both, because you can sacrifice to Poseidon all day long. But if your navigational tools aren't working and you have bad winds, you're not going to thrive in the way that you would hope. So worship reflected maritime danger and how sanctuaries served as social and political centers with elite competition and gatherings. At Kolonos, they shared the epithet Hippia, meaning of horses. Poseidon was the creator of horses, and Athena was the tamer of horses. Poseidon Hippia has also been tied to the thundering waves on rocks and the sound of thundering hoofbeats. So this worship demonstrates mythological cooperation and their shared worship, a practice that was so intertwined and so integrated that they actually shared an altar. When Poseidon and Demeter were worshipped together, this role shifts drastically. In winter, during the non sailing season, we were talking about him becoming a freshwater and fertility god. So this is seen in festivals such as the Haloa, which is in winter for fertility, rest, and agricultural renewal, as well as the Skira, which is during the harvest for protection of crops and future fertility. These festivals show worship tied to agricultural cycles, strong gender roles, with women playing critical ritual functions, like we talked about before as well, and religion working as social cohesion and seasonal rhythms. So here the sacrifices match the epithets. So fish, you could see the sea aspect. Bulls, you could see storm power. Grain, you see the agricultural role. So the gods themselves did not change, human needs did. As circumstances shifted, people emphasized different aspects of the divine, and epithets served as the key tool for expressing these changing relationships.
So I know that the evidence may be limited here, but Do we have any data that we can draw on to create, for example, like a frequency timeline for when these different worship periods would have happened?
Not that I know of. Um, I know it got quite complicated trying to connect all of the literary sources. It was quite all over the place, and the concept of, especially with Poseidon, the freshwater link was crucial. I didn't find that for the longest time. That was the bit that set the article really in motion, because for the first half, it was a paper with a lot of ambition and a little bit of direction, and it was that main part that really shifted that into something much more satisfying to my curiosity.
For the archaeological evidence, is there, I don't know if there's enough, but would it be possible to take, for example, some of the faunal remains and date them to use as sort of a basis for the different times of use? Or is
Oh,
maybe there not enough
absolutely.
for that? I think.
No, I think based off my research, the extensive variety of the fish species used, that has an incredible amount of potential for analysis. And then if you look at during the grain festivals, you have those remains, and you have small bits of evidence, and that's not exactly my field, but it would be very, very interesting to see, like you were saying with faunal remains, kind of looking into that and then using that juxtaposed to these literary sources, seeing how that kind of connects would be very interesting.
Yeah, I think using that maybe with and I think maybe Ashley might be able to chime in on this one, but some stable isotope analysis of like the different types of plants and grains that they'd be using at that time and use that as sort of a comparative analysis, see what mm, how the diet may have been supplemented throughout the year would be a really interesting way to look at the same topics. Maybe
Oh, I'm
provide some
sure. And
insight.
knowing what we know now, kind of applying that baseline to new research would definitely be helpful.
What was the earliest evidence of the Greek gods and how over time they kind of changed and evolved to meet the society's needs?
I think, especially if you look at the very beginning with Gaia and Chaos, you have the Titans first, and then you have the Pantheon. And even as the Pantheon is being developed, it starts with Poseidon, Zeus, and Hades, and then you see the rest of the Pantheon sort of taking shape. But trying to put a timeline to that and organization to that is, professionally said, an absolute mess. And you could spend all day researching it, and I've um I've studied it for a very long time, and there's so many different interpretations as well that it's very hard to have a straightforward answer.
I think it would just be very interesting to see. I don't know. I like the origins of things, which is, I guess, why
Mhm.
I got into archaeology, just to think. I feel like this would be like some ADHD midnight rabbit hole thing going into like, well, how did the Greek gods start and how did they evolve and what's the original archaeological evidence for this? And
Exactly. How do you think this article started?
yeah.
Have you seen any similarities to other studies that have looked at religious revivals in other cultures, or is that something that would be completely out of your scope?
For now, completely out of my scope, but definitely something I would look into, especially like you were saying with the Norse culture, where you see Norse mythology, you see a lot of there's a lot of interest in that today as well. And with interest and curiosity and passion comes revival. So it would absolutely be interesting to look into.
What are you currently working on, or what's the next interest of research or research interest?
So I'm currently working towards my PhD in maritime archaeology and art history with a focus on ship figureheads. So since approximately 3000 BC, ship figureheads have been brought into existence, taking on a plethora of roles in a maritime centric world. Predominantly made of wood, many have failed to withstand the test of time, limiting research to iconographic and literary evidence rather than the material remains. Often enhanced in a stylistic manner, accuracy can be blurred between the lines of intention and interpretation. To take this further, there have been recorded instances of figureheads being transferred under new ownership and direction. Tracking the origin and purpose of figurehead imagery is complex and provides quite a bit of room for confusion and misinterpretation, largely surrounding the sex of the personified vessels. Features such as breasts, flowing hair, and wide hips are not isolated from masculine traits such as beards or broader noses. The androgynous aspect must not be dismissed as sexually identifiable, but rather included in the cataloged analysis of humanistic features within ornamental design. This study is done to form contrasts between figureheads on warships and merchant vessels, in doing so, identifying connections between physicalized femininity and the personification of the sea. The expected contribution of this work is to identify relations within ship carvings and the physicalization of sex, as well as identifying boundaries and overlap between animalistic and humanistic attributes in the eyes of ancient seafarers.
Before we wrap things up, is there anything we didn't discuss that you would like to talk about, or something that was in this article that you're really passionate about or that you want people to know?
I think we just about covered it with the fish bones and all.
Sounds good to me. Any other questions before we wrap up, Les?
Do you want to share your love of lionfish on the actual recording?
Absolutely. We were talking about scuba diving and my first experience. Um, I used to work at an aquarium, the Monterey Bay Aquarium in California, and they have a lionfish exhibit. And it's quite big, but the lionfish will rest on the seafloor as they often do. And I had never seen them swim. And my first open water dive was in Egypt, actually. And we got off the boat. And the moment I was in the water, I had the moment that there was a chance I was in over my head. And then I saw a lionfish, and I had this moment where I thought, like, this is the thing. This is the whole reason I'm here. This is the moment. And I'm getting to see something, but I'm getting to see it in its own environment. Like, here, I'm the guest, I'm the outsider, and I get to just observe this behavior. And as soon as I thought my mind was already blown, it lifted up its fins. And if you've ever seen a lionfish swim, if you haven't, I recommend looking it up. But they look like wings underwater, and it's just absolutely magnificent. And he lifted up its fins, and it just sort of flew away. And I remember thinking, like, this is this animal in its environment. This is me getting to see something that you could never see in captivity. You could never see at any aquarium, no matter how well done it is. You could never fully comprehend how it behaves and how it interacts with its environment in that way. And I remember my regulator basically almost falling out of my mouth because my jaw just dropped. And then the one other thing that I saw that also stood out, a blue spotted ray. And the blue spots were so electric. It looks like when you rub your eyes really fast and you see those little blue spots. That's what I thought was happening. And it was just so vibrant. I didn't even think it was real. And we came up and I thought, okay, so this one animal that I think I knew, I didn't know at all. I didn't understand it. And then there's also something I didn't even know existed. So what else is down here? Like, what else am I missing? And that was it. And now it's my life.
So when you're okay, so you said you worked at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. Are you from Monterey County, or did you just live there at that time?
I was born in Monterey. Yes.
Okay, because I grew up in Monterey County. Small world. Uh,
Wow. Okay.
yeah,
That's
I
very cool.
actually moved to King City in first grade, and I was there till I was 15, and then I graduated from Gonzales, and then from Hartnell I transferred to Sac State, and then couldn't afford grad school, so then went into the military, and then ended up coming back and going to DLI, and then failed the DLPT and got reclassed. But yeah, no, small world. How funny.
That's very cool.
All right, thank you again for being on the show with us today. For those of us who are watching us on YouTube, Don't forget to like and subscribe. If this is your first time watching or listening, you'll find us on Apple Podcasts, Castbox, Audible, or YouTube. And don't forget to check us out on Instagram at Anthropotamus. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was fun.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you all for listening. Distribution of Anthropotamus is in collaboration with the American Anthropological Association. Please continue to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Anthropotamus for our latest episodes, show notes, and book discussion schedule.